君には何が見える？敵は何だと思う？
Who do you think the real enemy is? This question is posed in episode 15 of the first season of Attack on Titan. And while, within the context of this scene, the question is adequate, it struck me as strange at the time. The phrase is so focused on that I was certain that author Hajime Isayama wanted to pose it to the reader/viewer as well. But what would a question like that even mean in a series like Attack on Titan? After all, it's just a story of humans fighting giant zombies. It should be obvious that the Titans are the enemy. Right? Well, if you have kept up with the series in any capacity past season 1, then you might know that things sure have changed. So much so that now, in 2019, it's very much an interesting question to try and answer. So, join me, and let's talk about the true enemy of Attack on Titan. The concept of the enemy starts out deceptively simple in Attack on Titan. We are presented with a world overrun by otherworldly, mindless monsters focused on devouring humanity. This setup immediately creates an expectation in our minds. As survival stories have been done to death, most of us have developed mental heuristics to quickly predict what's gonna happen. Humanity will work towards overcoming its differences and rally together in the name of survival. And from this prediction alone, the question of who the enemy is seems pretty superfluous. However, this is Isayama we're talking about, so inevitably, we got bamboozled. Indeed, the simplistic setup doesn't stick around for very long, as it is quickly revealed that our main character, Eren, is, in fact, a Titan himself. This reveal immediately sets off a change in the story's relation with the concept of the enemy. Eren's transformation alongside conflicting information regarding the Titans and their biology causes the Titans to turn from relatively straightforward evil beasts to a mysterious, almost untangible force. What are they and what do they want? Why do they eat humans if they just vomit them out anyway? As the questions start piling up, the Titans become less of a malicious faction and more of a mystery to be solved. Meanwhile, the fact that Eren can transform into one blurs the lines between humans and Titans, further muddling who exactly the enemy is supposed to be. Once the female Titan appears, the concept is made slightly clearer. It, together with the armored and colossal Titans, now presents the enemy factions, the Shifters, hell-bent on the eradication of humanity for yet unknown reasons. And while Eren being able to shift does still make this way less clear-cut than the Titans were at the beginning, the narrative starts focusing on the Shifters as the main threat. However, this, again, ends up being complicated. This starts as early as the end of the female Titan arc, as Annie's tears flow before Eren can devour her. Through this, Isayama begins implanting the idea that the misery caused by the Shifters isn't done out of a malicious evil, but perhaps due to more difficult reasons. At the same time, the series begins expanding on the idea that humanity isn't as united as it should be, with the military police being a bunch of cunts, and the church hiding vital information. Slowly but surely, the Titans get sprinkled in an empathetic light, while the seeds of suspicion get planted within humanity itself. The story doubles down on this as now Shifters begin popping up left and right, with people like Reina, comrades in arms, turning out to be the enemy, conspiring with the ever-elusive Beast Titan to do what? At this point, the questions begin piling up with no real answers in sight. At the same time, the perspective of humanity is even further put into question. The government is corrupt, a human can control the Titans, and the royal family has been mind-wiping the populace for years. It's in this unsure, uncertain atmosphere that our protagonists set out into Shiganshina for the supposedly final clash with the supposed enemy. And this does play out like an all-out battle for survival between good and evil. That being said, we still get glimpses into the complicated nature of the warriors and their mission, and the conflicting feelings they have on their situation. Nevertheless, the battle is won, and we of course get the iconic reveal in the basement. This, of course, further complicates the question of the enemy, as now the world is expanded infinitely and with it, the enemy as well. Now it's not a bunch of mindless monsters, nor is it a small faction of shifters. Instead, it's the entire nation of Marley, alongside many other countries who would prefer seeing the Eldians wiped out. Now, this is as far as the anime has gone with the end of Season 3, and before we enter the forbidden territory of the manga, I would like to quickly summarize how the idea of the enemy has worked thus far. Isayama has, up to this point, continuously expanded the horizon of what the enemy actually is, and with it, continued to put into question the motives and mechanics of said enemy. With something like the Titans, at least the way they are initially presented, you don't really need much of a motive, as it is the quote, advantage of using monsters as enemies. However, because of the introduction of shifters, the question of motivation becomes more urgent, and with it, things get complicated. What do they want? What's their motive, and is it justified? You couldn't really ask these questions regarding pure Titans. However, even with these questions, the enemy is still at least somewhat present. While Reina and Bertolt struggles do put things into a bit of a conflicting perspective, the glimpse of Marley that we see through Grisha's memories is, by and large, the glimpse of an immensely powerful and generally malicious enemy. Between the oppression of Eldians and the authoritarian military abuse of power, it's pretty clear at this point that the bad guys are the Marleyans. So while questions do exist, this section of the story has mostly focused on expanding the idea of the enemy, starting with a simple Titan threat, going into a more organized group of shifters, and finally revealing a full-on nation of opposing forces. And what does Isayama do next? Well, this is where we part ways with the anime onlys, as we head into major spoiler territory. This is the only warning you'll get. We good? Good. As the story enters the Marley arc, we, the readers, are put into a similar situation as the young warriors infiltrating the walls. We are entering enemy territory, expecting to be subjected to all the cruelty we know they are capable of. We are ready to see the true devils of this story. But that simply doesn't happen. Instead, just like Reina and his gang, we witness something even more shocking. Humans. We expected monsters, yet what we get is a country filled with people just trying to live out their lives in relative peace and quiet. Even the government, while largely corrupt and cruel, houses some people who only want to live without any malicious intent. In short, Marley isn't really all that much different from the populace inside the walls. There is good and bad on both sides, oppression and propaganda in both regimes. And just as this reality starts dawning on us, Eren attacks Liberio, slaughters countless innocent civilians, and provokes a large-scale conflict with Marley for his own agenda. Shortly after, Eren betrays the island of Paradis and escapes to follow his own plans with the help of Zeke and the Jaegerists. So now, we have learned that our enemy is not as homogeneously evil as we'd like them to be, while our protagonist has committed a war crime and has basically become an anti-hero. And it is in this conundrum where we find the answer to Erwin's question. Who is the real enemy? Well, as things stand, humanity's true enemy is humanity itself. And that is brilliant. We, thanks to our knowledge of common storytelling, expect the central antagonistic force to appear as one person or group. This is how it usually is, especially in shonen manga. As long as there's a bad guy that our hero can punch in the face, we can cheer them on and watch as all the problems are solved. But this is of course incredibly naive. Just like Eren in the earlier seasons, we cling to the idea that there must be a palpable enemy that our protagonists can destroy in order to bring peace and all that. But Attack on Titan doesn't accommodate for that, and instead takes a more complex approach. The suffering seen in the series isn't the result of some evil master plan concocted by a malicious supervillain, nor is it the consequence of mindless beasts. Instead, the true perpetrator of this world is humanity and its never-ending struggle for survival and desire for competition. The Eldians just want to survive and the Marleyans just want to feel safe, But because of greed, power hunger, apathy, and selfishness on both sides, the situation continuously escalates into cruelty and violence. No one party here is inherently, fundamentally evil, but because of the historic circumstances and the states of their ruling organs, they are thrown into pain and misery time and time again. Not because of any one villain, but because of humanity's infinite desire to survive at the cost of others. Attack on Titan was never a story about good versus evil. The irony here is that, even though the start of the series obscures many things, the original setup already establishes that. The idea of a central villain is something we as the audience began attaching to the series as the shifters started popping up. However, this misled us, as the story began not as a conflict between hero and villain, but instead as a tale about survival. But instead of humanity trying to survive the Titan onslaught, the story reveals itself to have been about humans trying to survive alongside and against each other. And the reason this is brilliant is because it, as a result, gives us a very similar perspective as Eren. Our simplistic idea of how good and bad are supposed to work in a story like this get dissolved and destroyed bit by bit as the reveals start piling up, until we realize that we were, just like Eren, trying to oversimplify an incredibly complex situation in order to rationalize our protagonists fighting against the enemy. We wanted a villain that we can hate, but instead we got people. The Eldians are certainly not in the wrong for just wanting to live without oppression, and the Marleyans aren't wrong to fear the resurgence of a genocidal empire in possession of an apocalyptic weapon. But because of ignorance, division, blind hostility, and the absolute refusal to actually talk and communicate, both of these parties find themselves in a continuously perpetuated state of conflict and suffering, which in turn breeds more rage and cruelty. This has gone on for so long, for as long as humanity has existed, that people are just chained by it. There is no getting out of it anymore. Both Berthold and Marco say as much. There was nothing any of us could have done. We haven't even had the chance to talk things out. And I find that this not only works incredibly well in immersing the reader as we experience all these steps gradually, but it also manages to parallel the real world as well. There isn't one central villain in real life that we can defeat to make everything fine and dandy. And equally, the conflict of Attack on Titan echoes this by not having one single enemy that one can defeat to solve every problem. So, in the struggle of the Titans against the humans, it turns out that, ironically, the humans were both the monsters and its own greatest enemy. The hell everyone is trapped in is a hell of humanity's making, a result of continuous apathy and selfishness, of ignorance and small-mindedness, of division and lies. The real enemy wasn't the Titans, the Shifters, and definitely not Eren. None of this happened because of one person or party. Rather, it happened because humanity and the world it lives in are just that cruel. Thank you for watching, subscribe if you haven't, ring the bell so you can see when I upload shit. Take care and be safe. Bye bye.